The first thing that comes to mind is, I think of feedback as a very content-specific thing, right? There's something you're doing. You're not giving people a chance to speak. But there's also a process. And so we can have a content conversation or a process conversation.
Roxy and I love self-compassion. And I think both of us find it foundational for anything to happen at any level, in any organization.
If you can build this kind of relationality, this kind of resonance, it saves time in the long run. You're building trust, and then you put a lot less energy and time into arguing with people to get stuff done.
With resonance, the way that I define it, it is a requirement to actually enter the experience and to say, do I get you? Do I understand you?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We have been talking with Roxy Manning and Sarah Peyton and having an incredible conversation around trust and inclusivity. In this second part, we are going to dive into communication and feedback and hear incredible gems, nuggets, and wisdom shared by both. Roxy, hi.
Hi, Rajkumari.
Sarah, hello.
Hi, Rajkumari.
Let's shift gears and themes and talk about communication and feedback. This is something I get all the time, the refusal to receive feedback. Mm-hmm. How does a leader work with the person who is not willing to take feedback? Or how does anyone work with anyone who is not willing to take feedback?
Part of me is curious. What does it mean that someone's not willing to take feedback? Like, I'm really, that's like, really?
So that's a great question, actually. My experience, I'll give you one anecdote, is I was brought in to work with someone who was about to be fired. And they wanted to keep this person because they were bringing in very important revenue percentage for the company. And so when we did our meet and greet, when I would say, well, what do you say to this feedback that you're showing up in a way that's not listening or empathic, or that you're showing up and not giving space for others to voice their thoughts or opinions? The reply that I got was a variation for 55 minutes of, they are incompetent. Ooh. So there was a breakthrough at the very last 5 minutes that I won't get into, and that's not relevant to this question. Mm-hmm. But when someone is constantly deflecting, constantly gaslighting, and not willing to receive the accumulation of feedback from cross-functional teams, from the direct reports, whatever it might be, how do we work with that individual?
The first thing that comes to mind is, I think of feedback as a very content-specific thing, right? There's something you're doing. You're not giving people a chance to speak. But there's also a process. And so we can have a content conversation or a process conversation. And I would stop and say, let's have a process conversation in this moment. We've been trying to give you some content feedback about different ways you're showing up, but the process of it is not working. Every time I give you this feedback, every time other people have given you this feedback, you respond in this way. You respond in a way that's dismissing or denying or alleging that the person's incompetent. And that's something about the process in which you're receiving feedback that's not working. So I want to put the content aside for a moment and talk about the process and what's going on here and what the block is. And so have that process conversation first before I try to get them to pay attention to the content. So that's where I'd start.
Roxy, where have you been all my life? That's genius. I love that. That is a fantastic response. Sarah, you want to add to that?
Well, one of the things that I notice people doing when they're given feedback is that they, thinking of a recent feedback conversation, which I'll tell you about in a moment, and that'll explain why I'm laughing. But one of the things I notice is that people will, I don't know if there's an official word for it, there must be, but they'll say, but half the people have given me very good feedback.
Yes.
half the people love
Yes.
me.
Yes. Oh, thank you for bringing that in.
Yeah. And so, and
And they do. But
I have moved towards this somewhat in the way that Roxy's saying, but with a slightly different bent, which is to start to look at what's needed from this person in their position that's not happening. Mm-hmm. And what are they able to do and what are they not able to do? And is what they're doing in their position with only half the people behind them, is it getting us where we need to go?
I like that a lot.
But the reason that I was laughing is because I was most recently in a feedback conversation where I yelled, which is not nonviolent communication. Or you have to really yell in needs if it's nonviolent communication. So that's why I was laughing, was because even with the best of intentions, we'll get in there and it'll be frustrating as all get out, and we'll find that our volume goes up. And then there's this huge need, because it's always the body of the leader that's really what's at issue. And so, self-compassion in those moments, so that you can get back to what's the mission, what's the longing, what's the shared vision and purpose that will allow us to begin to integrate some of the feedback.
There's something that came up as I heard you, which is, I also, like you mentioned, gaslighting, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's not even just the half the people love me, right, but I'm denying what people are telling me.
Absolutely.
And I also love being super straight with people. If an organization brings me in and I have no relationship, you can't fire me. I get to tell you, like, okay, I want to be real with you. In this moment, you're saying X, Y, and Z, and I want you to hear that that is not the experience of many people. And when you're saying X, Y, and Z, you're essentially telling me that you're ignoring or not able to take in this really important information. And I'd love to, again, now I'm switching to process. I'd love to know why. I'd love to know why it would be hard for you to hear this, or what's making it challenging for you. And, I'm not going to argue with them about, is it true or not? It's just like, I'm seeing this. Other people are telling me this. Why is this hard for you to take in? What's the problem here? And what are you afraid of, almost, right? And what you're afraid of is really the key for a lot of these folks, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. I want to, since we're in the theme of communication and feedback, I want to double click on self-compassion. And I'm going to be a little facetious, but I'm actually not. I'm going to ask some simple questions, but I think for the larger audience, these are sincere questions. What is self-compassion? And how do I begin to speak to myself in a way that allows me to see myself?
Well, Roxy and I love self-compassion. And I think both of us find it foundational for anything to happen at any level, in any organization, anything effective to happen. I'm going to spend a moment talking about the brain, just to grab this for a second. If we have the brain in the palm of the hand, and we have a sense of the limbic system. This is a Daniel Siegel hand model demonstration. The brain in the palm of the hand with the limbic system here, the thumb being the center of the brain with the cortex all curled around it. The limbic system is where all the emotion happens. And it's where everything that Roxy's pointing to, like, what's the block? What's the block? The block is there. It's hidden down there in the limbic system. It may not even have any words yet. And so as we begin to move towards the self with warmth, so self-compassion rather than the compassion for others, we actually are starting to kind of not just curl and protect the defensive part of the self, we're actually beginning to create the neural connections between the prefrontal cortex and particularly the amygdala that are needed for mourning, as we've been talking about, but are needed for self-compassion. In that moment when I hear myself yelling, then the self-compassion is like, oh, hon, Sarah, I wonder if you're experiencing some embarrassment and shame in this moment. And if you really, really want to be able to show up with integrity, and also, do you just need some acknowledgement of sheer overwhelming frustration? Mm-hmm. And then as we name the emotional experience, what happens is that the limbic system loses its charge. Mm. And all of a sudden, the body of the leader becomes clear again. And this is a part of nonviolent communication, self-empathy processes, is turning towards the self and really being with what are the feelings and what are the deep longings that we have for integrity, for our mission, for efficiency, for follow-through, for responsibility, all of these things. Roxy, where does this take you?
Yeah. I'm thinking about this question of like, what is self-compassion? And in a very gentle way, it's almost like treating myself the way I could easily treat other people, right? So many of us can hold warmth and understanding, forgiveness for other people. And it's, can I do that for myself? And there is something, like when you asked, what are some of the ways that we can start to build that muscle? Mm-hmm. Wow. That's something I've struggled on most of my life, right? Mm. It's been probably one of my biggest journeys, and I'm still on that journey. And it's also recognizing that there are a lot of really good reasons why so many of us have learned not to be self-compassionate, sure. Where we've learned that the only way we can motivate ourselves, the only way that we can protect ourselves is if we can attack ourselves before someone else attacks us. Mm-hmm. If I can think of the worst things that you're thinking of, that you could be thinking of, then I can protect myself against it. So one of my practices was, when I noticed that something happened and I was really down on myself, beating myself up, sometimes I couldn't shift that in the moment. But after I would take a moment to say, okay, what was going on there? What was important to you? Exactly what Sarah described, right? What are the feelings I had? What was I longing for? What mattered to me? And I can give myself self-compassion after the fact. And the more that I did that, the more accessible it became, closer to the actual time that I needed it. So almost be self-compassionate about the fact that you might not have access to it right in the moment when things are blowing up. It might be that you've got to do this afterwards. You've got to hold yourself with care and look backwards. And that has an impact. It really starts to change our experience of ourselves.
That's really beautiful. I love that so much. How do we use, well, first of all, what's the difference between compassion and empathy?
When I think of compassion, I'm thinking about holding care, like having a reaction, an emotional reaction that's about holding care for the other person's experience. When I think about empathy, I'm thinking about an understanding and a resonance with the other person's experience, but it's not about my holding care necessarily. So that feels like a little bit of the qualitative difference between the two.
I love that.
I'm curious what you'd say, Sarah.
My definitions come really close to yours, Roxy.
Yeah. So taking that definition for the both of you, which do I use, compassion or empathy, both, to de-escalate a conversation where someone is getting defensive?
I'd like to introduce a new concept.
Please. Might it be resonance?
How did you know?
I don't know. It was a wild guess, really.
I think that with both empathy and compassion, I can have them from across the room. I do not have to actually be in a relational connection with the person who is suffering. With resonance, the way that I define it, it is a requirement to actually enter the experience and to say, do I get you? Do I understand you? And in order to do what Roxy does when she's talking about what's the block, what's in the way, what's really important to this person? Why are they afraid? That requires an inquiry in order for it to move into effectiveness. My experience then, to go back to the prison story, which was in one of the previous themes, is in hearing what the people were yelling at each other and writing on the board and calling out the needs with big letters. I was also listening. Did the sound in the room start to go down with the naming of those particular needs guesses in a way, with those big values, integrity, fairness, justice, responsiveness, hope, so I'm listening, I'm making the guesses and I'm listening. And this is part of what's beginning to decrease conflict at any rate, not necessarily defensiveness. Defensiveness, I'd like Roxy to speak to because you have some really cool ideas here.
When I think about defensiveness, for sure, empathy. I think no matter what, we're going to need empathy. And I think the question about compassion depends on my purpose. Like there's not for me, defensiveness is always going to require compassion. Sometimes somebody might be defensive and I can have some empathic understanding about what's going on for them, why they're showing up in this way, but not necessarily have compassion and still be effective. So I think it really depends on what the issue is and what my purpose is in connecting with that person.
That's such an interesting, nuanced way of looking at it. What's the nuance between empathy and resonance? If resonance is the relational buy-in that I'm required to be in with that person, I can be across the room with empathy going, oh, I get that person. Got it. Oh, okay. Now I understand. So I might be watching a webinar or a TED Talk.
Sure.
I might be listening to a speaker on stage who's sharing a very difficult story, and I can empathize with them. But for me to be in resonance, I have to be sitting with that individual, agreeing to be in relationality with them, having the conversation, looking to get, you're raising your index finger. Dive in, go, Sarah.
You can be across the room from somebody else and you can make eye contact about something that somebody else is saying and know that you understand each other. So it can be one person understanding another, which will happen like often with mothers and children, where you know that something has happened that impacts the child and you're like making eye contact and the child's like, yeah, my mom gets me. But the child isn't necessarily getting the mom. Or you can be friends or coworkers and you're like, yeah, boy, this is really messed up. And there it is where both people are getting each other. But no matter what it is, in some way, someone is saying, yes, you understand me. Yes, you understand me.
That's beautiful.
I had a great example of resonance, of this kind of resonance.
Please.
We were in the middle of this very intense retreat that was looking at race and equity. And somebody made a comment and every Black person in the room just looked at each other and then they all got up and walked out.
Oh my God.
And that was like a powerful moment of resonance, right?
Yeah.
Like no words were spoken, but every Black person in that room was like, wow. And they got it and they walked out and then they had connection, conversation, support. But that moment in the room, the folks who walked out were clearly understanding something was going on. The folks who sat didn't quite get it. And that was a really powerful moment of resonance.
Wow.
Yeah.
I also I'm still thinking about your piece about defensiveness. And now I'm asking myself, does one need resonance to deal with defensiveness? And I think defensiveness can be responded to from a cognitive place, but I don't know that it will be as effective depending on the reason for the defensiveness. So it's always nice to bring in resonance. It's like, if you can, bring it in.
Yeah.
And if you can't, then there can be a way of just cognitively naming, here's what I see happening, and seeing if that connection can actually then lead to some resonance.
Totally. For those in the audience, I just want to point out that there are courses and classes around resonance for Sarah and Roxy.
Mostly Sarah. Sarah's the expert on resonance. Yeah.
So if you're interested in learning how to be more resonant in your language, I would encourage you to explore that, as I have done. For those of you who know my relationship with Sarah, I stalked Sarah until she met with me in person, and then we have been collaborating ever since. Ernest Young came out with an article that talked about how 84% of workforces globally are hungry for empathic leadership. So really stepping into the mastery and the fluency of I talk about bihemispheric leadership styles all the time. How do we bring forth that empathic, resonant way of being?
Absolutely.
Right? And how do we normalize it and make it part of an embodied stance that we just kind of naturally and organically, fluidly connect with? Thank you both so much for this conversation on communication and feedback. I think what the two of you shared is going to be incredibly helpful for the audience, practical, tactical ways to engage. So thank you, Roxy.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Sarah, for being here.
So glad to be here.